Be the Talk, episode 194, featuring Becky Blanton. Welcome to Be the Talk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself, I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with TED Global alumni, Becky Blanton. Becky, are you ready to talk?
I'm ready to talk. Let's do it.
Becky Blanton is a TED Global speaker and a full-time ghostwriter. Becky is currently a part-time RVer, an associate editor for Airstream Life Magazine, and working on her third van conversion. Becky's learning to sail. She enjoys ocean kayaking and camping, obviously. A former journalist and photojournalist, Becky loves photography as well. Becky Blanton, welcome to the talk.
Thanks, Nathan. I'm glad to be here.
Well, your talk is called The Year I Was Homeless. And this is a great perspective because you talk not just about homelessness, but a very important sector of that, working homelessness. So you describe going in, we all have a joke, going into the salt mines when we kind of complain about going into work. But in your case, you were coming back from work and it was in the summertime, real sticky and hot. In the wintertime, it was very, very cold, and there were all kinds of challenges that you have. And yet, when you finally sat down after a few months and talked with someone about it, it sounded to me like they almost discounted you and said, oh, you're not one of them. You have a job, so you're not one of them. So please take us behind the talk. There are a whole bunch of different sides to this. I'd love to hear it. Take us behind the talk. Okay.
I had a job. I was a full-time editor making good money at a Colorado newspaper, and my dad died. And what a lot of people don't know is he was physically, sexually abusive. And so when you have an abuser die, it messes with your head. And I quit my job, bought a van, $700, and hit the road. And the idea was I didn't want to have any regrets. We'd come to terms before he died. He had brain cancer. And I had an essay I wrote for Tim Russert's book, Wisdom of Fathers. And
say that again.
About calling him a monster.
Becky, it kind of went down the Skype. The Wisdom of Fathers was the name of the book?
Wisdom of Our Fathers by Tim Russert. And my essay about my dad came out in that book about the time I started, traveling around the U.S. And what happened was I thought I was just traveling in a van. I've always camped. I've been a raft guide. For me, it was just, you're living in your van. But people around me started saying, oh, no, if you live in a van and you're 50 years old, you're homeless. I was working 2 jobs, but I couldn't find affordable housing. And that's what it came down to was, how people saw me was not who I was. But I started believing this stuff. I started believing the way they treated me, that I was worthless and useless and some kind of person that was into steal the silver. So it played with my head a lot. And that was kind of what the talk was about. The theme of TED Global was invisibility, and I felt really invisible. And it was actually 18 months in the van. So it was almost 2 years before I stopped identifying with that population.
Becky, I'm going to hit time out right now, and because I think there might be extra sunspots or something going on. The connection is, I'd give the connection an A-, but with your talk and everything else, I want this to be as good as possible. I'm going to continue the Facebook Live. What I'm going to ask, and I'm going to do this also, we're going to both turn off our videos, and hopefully the audio will be more even when we do that. So I've just taken my video down. You've just taken your video down, and we're actually good. So we're going to continue on. That's one of the challenging pieces of this. So, all right. So so correction, Becky. Thank you for bringing me the correction. It was closer to 2 years. My question to you, that you were living in a van, you had endured abuse, you had a hard time finding affordable housing, yet you didn't self-identify as homeless. Looking back on it now, because this was quite a few years ago, what would you categorize yourself as? Do you see it differently now looking back at this time in life, or do you have kind of mostly the same view?
I really believe homelessness is not about where you live, but it's about your financial situation and the number of choices that you have. I didn't have a lot of choices because I wasn't making the same money I had been. And the government defines homeless as, differently. They define it as living in a building or a permanent structure designed to be lived in. There are truckers are basically homeless, because they live in their trucks. I know salespeople, construction workers, all kinds of people. And right now, the big rage is for college kids to buy a van and convert it and travel the U.S. and live in their van. Essentially the same thing I was doing, but a lot of them work, but they're on the road and they're living in a van, but they don't get called homeless. I was 50 at the time. I'm 62 now. And I think age has a lot to do with it too. So it's all about, how you define it, how you see it.
Well, and so what I'm hearing from that is perhaps the powers that be need to, as well as maybe some nonprofit groups or NGOs, we need a better working definition of homelessness.
Yeah, and the 15% of the homeless that people see are the ones who are, they're addicts, they're pedophiles, they're recently released felons, they have mental health issues. That 15 to 20%, according to the homeless statistics, are the ones that we see on the streets. The 80%, like I was, were, they work full-time or part-time. They're actively looking to get off the street. They're responsible. They lost their housing due to, either a car broke down or somebody got sick or a child or spouse died or there was a divorce. I know a doctor and a lawyer right now who are both living in their offices because they're in the middle of a divorce and the bank locked up their checking accounts. They can't afford to do anything, so they're living in their office. And a few years ago, I knew an anchor person for CNN. I won't tell them your name, but she broke up with her boyfriend and was living in her car. So, at night she's on TV giving the news, and by day she's living in her car. And she did that for a month because he got abusive and she left. So it can happen to anybody. And people tend to stigmatize it by treating anyone who's homeless like they're one of that 15 to 20% with other issues.
Yeah, and I think we could add to the list, if my memory is correct, a whole bunch of staffers working in Senate and representative offices in Washington D.C. I've heard that they a lot of times can pull out cots and live right there, pull all-nighters and then some. So this definition of homelessness really needs to be either expanded or constricted. It seems like there's a stigmatized 20% for valid reasons or by society's view, and then there's another 80% of the working homeless who are in maybe more of a empowered situation within that demographic. Is that a fair way to look at it, Becky, or would you describe it in a different way?
No, I think that's very fair. And, if you just Google famous homeless people, Dr. Phil was homeless. When he was 12, he lived in a car with his dad. Jim Carrey, Halle Berry, the guy that plays James Bond, Jewel. Just Google it. There's hundreds of CEOs and business owners who were homeless at one point in their life.
So we've been talking with our first TED Global guest, Becky Blanton. We're having a pretty deep conversation about homelessness, which is another first for Be The Talk podcast. But we want to pivot over to you, Talk Universe. We want to go behind the talk, and we're going to do that in just a moment in the Blitz round. People ask, how could I start a 7-day-a-week podcast? It's because of what I've learned from my mentors. Some of the best mentors in history aren't around anymore. They've left hours of one-on-one mentoring behind in their books. Each month at Classics on Tap, I record a new chapter from a classic business book to help you make a difference. Download your first chapter at classicsontap.com. And we're back with Becky Blanton. It is time for the Blitz Round, in which I'm going to ask Becky a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and performance of her TED Talk. Not a TEDx one this time. It's a TED Talk, so this might be a little bit different. So, Becky, you ready to go?
Ready to go.
All right. Well, first question, were you selected to speak or did you apply? This is almost a silly question because I think everybody may know the answer to this.
I won a contest. Zombies got me to TED. Seriously, zombies got me to TED. I applied for a contest that Dan Pink was hosting, and I was one of 3 winners.
The famous business author, To Sell Is Human, Drive, A Whole New Mind, et cetera, et cetera. That Daniel Pink.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, go on.
And so he had a contest, and he picked the top 3 answers, and the contest was what would the next chapter in the adventures of Johnny Bunko be? And my answer was Stay Hungry. Famous Steve Jobs perspective. And so then you had to get people to vote for you. And the way I boosted my votes was I actually wrote the chapter. I was the only contestant to do that, but I actually wrote the chapter. I got some friends to illustrate it, and I was 100 votes out of first place when Seth Godin stepped in.
The number one marketing genius alive today, correct? That's Seth Godin. Wow, this gets better and better.
Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't ask him or anything. I was in a social media group of his, and I was very active and helped a lot of people, and he thought I deserved it. So he asked his followers to vote for me, and I kind of shot to first place, and then I won a trip to TED. So the prize was a trip to TED just to attend. And then they decided at the last minute, the TED organizers, that they wanted to invite all the attendees to submit a pitch for a talk. So I submitted a talk, and mine was selected, and that's how I got to speak at TED. But the book, the chapter, was about zombies.
Wow.
And I think you can still download it. You can still download it at Dan Pink's website. But the last chapter talks about zombies. So that's how I say zombies got me to TED. So it's going to be kind of hard to duplicate or replicate that.
So, okay. So I don't usually spend this much time on the first question, but this is highly unusual story, which is part of the reason we pivoted early. I knew something about this was coming up, but Dan Pink holds a competition and it was, I think I have the Johnny Bunko book myself. That was a cartoon book on business, correct? Something along those lines. Yeah. So you submitted. Yes. You submitted a piece for that, and the prize was not to go on the TED stage. Obviously, it was a trip to go see TED, which is almost as good. While you got there, the powers that be decided to give you another opportunity to actually pitch to be a TED speaker, and you won.
Yeah.
Wow. And I think Talk Universe, in case your hopes are up, I think that might have been like a one-shot deal. I think for all of us. So, wow. Well, great.
Well, I actually had 2 talks. I actually had 2 talks.
Okay.
Accepted, and Dan and the organizer that selected the talks were kind of torn between which one. They liked both of them. So I had 2 potential TED Talks, and they had to pick one. So they picked the homeless one.
Wow. Okay. Well, all right. Well, everything's downhill from here, folks. Okay. You walk out on stage. Did you have nerves, or were you in the zone, or neither, or both?
I was nervous. I went outside and cried for an hour afterwards, but that was the first time I ever spoke publicly anywhere in my life.
Oh, my word. Well, this is getting even better here, Talk Universe. First public speaking opportunity is not your local Toastmasters down the street, but TED Global. Yeah. Again, and probably another one-shot deal for that. Okay. Well, what was that experience like? Did you just kind of compartmentalize that in your head and said, I'll think and process that piece after I'm done, or did you find another way just to go through with this? I
rappelled out of helicopters in college. I was in ROTC, and I never felt as nervous jumping out of a good helicopter as I did getting on that TED stage. It was, I was shaking. And then there was all the applause at the end, and it was standing room only. And Dan Pink was in the front row, and I shook his hand after the talk and thanked him for the opportunity. And I really don't remember it. And as a matter of fact, I've never watched my own TED Talk.
Oh, well, hey, here's a hint. Here's a thought. It might be time to start, watching that, Becky, because it's a great talk. I mean, Talk Universe, you're going to be able to see it. And you see, this is the power of ideas worth spreading. This is the power of the TED platform in this case, as well as TEDx or any other branded talk that you're giving, because it's about the idea. It's not any other event would have a whole checklist for Becky. What other conferences have you spoken at? And where's your sizzle reel as a speaker and all these other things. And because of the idea-centric platform, this is not, usual. It's highly unusual, but, you see an idea very well articulated, which is my point. Becky gets up there. Mm-hmm. You can tell this is not something that she's doing every day, but it makes the power of what she's talking about, working homelessness, even more poignant, because it's not a polished, slick, professional, like some of us with all of our little moves and gestures and everything else that we do. So, I think that's the power of the platform right there. Becky, what's a technique or a tool that helped you?
Wow. Just being myself, be authentic, just tell people, just share with them, what I felt and what it was like. I worked on the speech a long time. I had a friend that kept saying, no, it's not good enough. Rewrite it. And,
well, we all have one of those friends.
Yeah, I actually wrote it in the van. I couldn't think, so I crawled into the van to kind of, revisit what it was like. And so I wrote the TED Talk from the van that I lived in.
How appropriate. Wouldn't have it any other way, right?
Right. And then when I got back from London, I got back in the van, I drove out of the airport, and I pulled off into a parking lot of an apartment complex, and I slept in the van. I was so exhausted, I slept in the van, and that seemed kind of appropriate too. It felt safe. So I don't know. It was a real trip. It changed me for sure.
We've been enjoying this riveting conversation with Becky Blanton. Her TED Talk is called The Year I Was Homeless, and you can go to our show notes page at BeTheTalk.com, and we will have a link to that, or you can type it into YouTube, find it that way, as well as we want you to connect with Becky, because she's got her hands in a lot of different great things, and you can connect with her and let her know how you felt about the talk, and maybe this is a topic that is really poignant for you. Maybe there are family members, maybe you've personally grew up in a situation similar to what Becky is describing. Maybe you have friends, maybe you have other people, or maybe you just plain want to be more educated about it. You want to connect with Becky, and you can do that at BeckyBlanton.com. Again, BeckyBlanton.com. We'll have a link to that in the show notes page as well. And we're going to be right back with Becky Blanton for the final word of advice. Everyone wants to change the world, but not everyone knows the first step. Before you can change the world with your talk, it has to be selected. So grab the templates, timelines, and tools that I use to get my talk selected at BeTheTalk.com. And we're back with Becky Blanton. It is time for the final word of advice for Talk Universe.
Okay. So my word of advice is to remember that no matter where you are or what you're going through, that's not who you are. It's where you are. And a lot of people forget that. So you've got to focus on where you want to be, where you're going, and not on what's happening to you right now.
Becky Blanton, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to Be The Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.